Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Welcome to our online class session. This is UM039. Okay, section B71. This is ethics class, and this afternoon we will be having our discussion, our second online lecture on ethics and culture. May I remind everyone that this session is being recorded, so as our classmates who will not be able to join us this afternoon to be able to check the online classes, and also para sa inyo rin na if you want to go back to our lectures, pwede nyo po siyang ma-retrieve doon po sa may Blackboard Collaborate section ng ating LMS or ng ating learning management system. I hope everybody is doing well, and so this afternoon we will be starting with our discussion on ethics and culture. So part of the topics that we will be covering this afternoon are the following. So pag-uusapan po natin unang-una, culture and our moral behavior. Also, we will look at the functions of culture. We will look at cultural relativism. We will look at moral relativism, and also we will be having our discussion on cultural tolerance. So those are the topics that we will be covering. Now, part of the learning objectives are the following. Aldrich, pwede pong pakibasa yung apat na learning objectives natin on your screen, please. Aldrich?
Yes, sir. Number 1, articulate what culture means. Number 2, attribute facets of personal behavior to culture. Number 3, recognize and appreciate differences in moral behavior of different cultures. Number 4, define cultural relativism and evaluate its strengths and weaknesses in making moral decisions.
Okay, thank you very much, Aldrich. So those are the learning objectives that hopefully ma-accomplish natin this afternoon. So again, welcome to our discussion. This is ethics in culture. Now, in this lesson, we will hopefully scrutinize the most significance of culture in understanding the moral actions of people. So in doing so, we will try to look at the contextual differences of societies and how these contextual differences affect the moral behavior of individuals. In the process, we will also try to look at the concept of cultural relativism. Ultimately, we will examine and evaluate the strength and weaknesses of cultural relativism as more and more people actually are invoking cultural relativism as the final arbiter in making their moral decisions. Okay, so yun po yung ating pag-aaralan. Now, part of the discussion that we had last Tuesday doon sa may discussion board is this question. Our first question doon po sa may discussion natin is this one. How do you think your community influences your behavior? Jawin, Homer Maglinaw, are you there? Hello, Jawin?
Yes,
Hi,
sir.
Jawin. Ano yung sagot natin dito sa may discussion board? Have you submitted yours already? Nag-submit ka na ba?
Yes, sir.
Okay, ano yung sagot mo
Yeah.
rito? If you can just summarize your answer naman. Go ahead, please. Paano
Check ko
na-impluwensyahan
lang
ng
po, sir.
lipunan mo? Okay. No mo, i-check pa. Pwede namang yung sariling sagot mo na lang. Okay, how do you think your community actually
Sir,
influences
pwedeng
your behavior? Ano po yan?
community affects my behavior because I have to go with those different people in our community. I have to
Okay.
be with the people who have different traits and beliefs. So, I have to adjust my behavior according to the community that I am belonging to.
Okay, let me just point that out. No, sabi mo, you have to adjust your behavior depending on the community that you belong to. Definitely, marami sa atin ganun din yung iniisip natin, di ba? Since we have different sets of social standards, the norms of the people in the society, we have to adjust our behavior according to normative behavior of people in the society, of what they prescribe to be right and wrong. As we continue on with our discussion, I want you to look on your screen at the moment. And here, we will be discussing about FGM, or female genital mutilation. Now, on January 3rd, 2018, Cable News Network, or CNN, reported that a Nigerian man, Daryl, kindly refresh mo yung iyong screen. Okay, para makita mo. Okay, CNN reported that a Nigerian man posted graphic pictures on Facebook showing children apparently going through what we call as genital mutilation. The post of this Nigerian man caused an outrage from his fellow Nigerians. And what happened was, because of the pressure, he had to take down his post, eventually apologizing for what he did. Now, when we talk about female genital mutilation, we have to understand that this is a practice still of some cultures around the world, including some African and Asian cultures. For us to understand FGM as a moral behavior or as a practice of other people, you can check on your screen right now. Now, there are different types of FGM. The first one is what we call as type 1 or clitoridectomy, meaning some parts of the clitoris ng babae ay tinatanggal po. Another one is excision, where it is actually considered as the removing part of all the clitoris and the inner labia, or yung lips that surrounds the vagina of a female, with or without the removal of the labia majora, or the larger outer lip. The third form of FGM is what we call as infibulation, the narrowing of vaginal opening by creating a seal formed by cutting and repositioning the labia. So anong ginagawa nila rito? Pinapaliit nila. Okay? And then yung lastly, other harmful procedures to the female genitals, including pricking, piercing, cutting, and scraping or sinusunog yung ari ng babae. Now, we can actually consider these acts, okay, as immoral acts, immoral behavior. But definitely, some cultures would think otherwise. And for some African and perhaps some Asian cultures, they would consider FGM actually as something na practiced and considered as accepted in their society. Now, the case of female genital mutilation is not entirely a new practice in many African countries. In fact, it is considered as a rite of passage to womanhood. Meaning, kaya nila ginagawa ang FGM, it is considered as rites of passage para sa mga kababaihan. Say, for example, sa atin, sa kultura natin, when you talk about rites of passage sa mga kalalakihan, ang kino-consider natin dito ay yung circumcision. So, at least sa kultura, they consider FGM or female genital mutilation as a rites of passage to womanhood, at least as a practice in many African countries, including Kenya, including Sierra Leone. Okay? While for other cultures in Africa, they consider FGM as a means of preserving a girl's virginity until marriage. Okay, so ulitin ho natin, there are two reasons why some cultures in Africa are actually practicing FGM or female genital mutilation. The first one is it is considered as a rites of passage to womanhood. And the second one, it is valued as a means of preserving virginity until marriage. Although there are already a lot of reports about this. In Nigeria, for example, since it has been declared, okay, as hindi tama, okay, ng United Nations, okay, they've already, tawag dito, nag-conduct sila ng study on FGM, and they found out that this is not supposed to be happening. And even though there were a lot of reports already about FGM, in particular in Nigeria, none had been convicted though for even doing, okay, even if it was already prohibited in their cultures since 2015. Okay, so saan ba natin makikita ang practice ng FGM sa mundo? So on screen here, you will see where FGM is still happening even at the moment. FGM is being practiced in 28 African countries and parts of the Middle East and even in Asia. It is also found in immigrant communities worldwide. Now, an estimated 100 to 140 million girls and women have been subjected to FGM or female genital mutilation. In Africa alone, around 3 million girls are taught to undergo FGM every year. Okay? Ilan po ito? Ulitin natin. 3 milyong kababaihan are going through female genital mutilation in Africa alone. Okay, so for them, FGM is a prerequisite for marriage, but it can cause actually what? A lifelong physical and psychological trauma. Okay, problems, if we may say, doon po sa mga nag-undergo ng FGM. Now, although culturally was and in some communities being viewed as an acceptable practice now, the World Health Organization already conducted a multi-country study on FGM in African countries, and it showed that women who had undergone FGM had actually significantly increased risks for adverse events during childbirth, and that an additional 1 to 2 babies per 100 deliveries die as a result of the practice. Now, if you are going to look at your screen right now, you can see here 4 repercussions of undergoing FGM or female genital mutilation. So it could be a gynecological complication. When we talk about gynecological complication, perhaps yung mga babae po na nag-undergo ng FGM could in the long term uh, encounter menstrual problems or pelvic pains. 'Di ba? Sabi nga ng mga babae kapag sila ay nagkakaroon ng buwan ng dalaw, masakit 'yon. Syempre, tayong mga lalaki hindi natin naiintindihan 'yon. Pero kapag ikaw ay nag-undergo ng FGM, pagkatapos nagkaroon ka ng iyong buwan ng dalaw, mas dihamak daw na mas masakit, okay, ang kanilang pinagdadaanang menstrual problems. Another problem na pwede nilang kaharapin for women who are girls who have undergone female genital mutilation is obstetric complications. Meaning, kapag sila po ay nanganak, posible po and malaki yung chances na ito ay kanilang ikamatay. Okay? Because it is so much more difficult for them doon sa kanilang pag-labor kasi nga pinakialaman na yung kanilang ari. Okay, pinaliit, it was scraped, it was burned, and whatnot. And not only gynecological complications or obstetric complications, perhaps they could also encounter mental health disorders. Perhaps these girls or ladies experience depression or anxiety. Okay, so posibleng sila ay makaranas ng ganoon. And also, they could be sexually dysfunctional, which is the last of the repercussions of FGM or female genital mutilations. And when we talk about sexual dysfunctions, they would have a hard time having intercourse with their husbands. Okay? Nagkakaroon sila ng tinatawag nating painful intercourse. Okay? So ayun po yung nagiging mga bunga ng ginawa sa kanila. Now, the case of genital mutilation has been deemed as a violation of human rights already by the United Nations. Nonetheless, even though it has been considered as a violation of human rights, this practice has not been entirely extinguished in some African and even in some Asian countries. Mali ba ang kanilang ginawa? And so as we proceed with our discussion, we will be talking about cultural relativism. And when we talk about cultural relativism, at least on your screen, you see here, cultural relativism is a concept of what is right and wrong in a specific culture. Meaning, when you talk about cultural relativism, ang pinag-uusapan natin dito is that there is no absolute truth. Now, one of the most difficult concepts in learning and in understanding kung ano yung tama at mali na kilos ng ating mga sarili ay ang konsepto ng cultural relativism. Since you have to understand people that culture and morality are actually intertwined, their inseparability in understanding our actions makes it even more complicated. Since we have to look at cultural lenses in figuring out whether we arrive at making moral decisions or not. Now, truthfully, we have to invoke the norms of our culture in deciding whether our choices mirror what is right in our culture or if it disgraces our moral ideas. When the act is acceptable, we do not usually change, much less question it. Okay, before I proceed with our slides, do you have any questions so far, guys? May questions po ba tayo? You can kindly chat your answers dito sa may chat box natin, or kung gusto niyo nang pwede niyo naman pong i-click yung raise your hand button dito sa ilalim po ng ating screen. Okay, again, when we talk about cultural relativism, medyo mabigat po ito. Okay, because this is a matter of saying that there is no right and wrong to a specific culture. And of course, when we talk about cultures of people, we have to underscore also the idea of norms. And when we talk about norms, these refer to social and cultural regulations and decrees that govern the everyday activities of people, inclusive of its moral and ethical imperatives, kung ano yung tama doon sa kanilang lipunan, sa kanilang kultura, sa customs nila, sa kanilang cultural practices. Now, when we abide by these norms, when we follow these norms, we are considered as normal as everyone else, doing kung ano yung tama sa lipunan, doing what is normative in our society. However, on the contrary, those who do otherwise, okay, who do not follow the norms or who go against the norms of the society are deemed strange. Sometimes we are considered as irrational, or to be blunt about it, we are considered as deviant, okay, going against what is socially prescribed. That is the reason why the moral behavior of people is actually hinged from what was ingrained to him as right. Kung ano yung pinakita sa kanya ng kanyang lipunan, ng kanyang kultura, kung ano yung right, ano yung proper, ano yung acceptable, definitely, which is all in the cultural context of the people. Perhaps, as this was acquired through the process of socialization, okay, nakikipag-socialize tayo sa mga tao, and in our socialization, doon natin nakikita kung ano yung tama at mali, tanggap at hindi sa ating lipunan. In the process of socialization, we become aware growing up of the many do's and don'ts, okay, the oughts and ought nots in our society, reflecting the upheld values of our people. Okay, so of course, pag tiningnan natin itong lahat, kailangan nating maintindihan muna kung ano ba ang ibig sabihin ng kultura. Okay, now this definition of culture is actually according to Sir Edward Tylor, the considered the father of modern anthropology. Anybody who wants to read this definition of culture, please? Sino pong gustong magbasa dito? Ang definition ng culture. Okay? Sino po yung gumagana yung microphone dyan? Pwede pong pakibasa yung definition ng culture natin dito. Okay? Meron po bang gustong magbasa naman dyan? Ezekiel Lebron! Zik! Is your microphone working? Gumagana na microphone natin, Zeke?
No, sir.
Hi. Hello, hello. Okay, ayan, gumagana ang microphone natin, sir. Sir, can you please read the definition of culture on screen, please?
Culture is defined as that complex whole which knowledge, beliefs, arts, morals, law, customs, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by a man as a member of society.
Thank you, Sik. Okay, maraming salamat. Now, again, when we speak of culture, it is defined as a complex whole. It is a whole, okay, isang buo siya, pero napaka-complex niya. In fact, napaka-komplikado. What makes culture complex is it does not only involve one aspect, okay, of what we see in the society, but it's like a web of system for us to understand kung paano ba nabubuhay ang isang lipunan. And here, in this definition, you will realize that when we talk of culture, it is inclusive of knowledge, of beliefs, of arts, morals, laws, customs, and all of it. So if you're going to look at that picture on your screen right now, it could actually include our attitudes, yung ating mga paniniwala. Even our language is actually included in our culture. In fact, when we talk about language, that is actually considered as the stone of our culture. And also, we talk about customs, we talk about rituals, we talk about our behavior, we talk about our faith, our religion, which is one big chunk of our culture, even yung ating pagkain, even yung arts, drama, music, lahat po ito ay bahagi ng ating kultura. Again, when we speak of culture, it is one big chunk of our society, and our culture dictates how we are supposed to act in varying situations based on what is right and wrong, acceptable or not, at least in our society. Now, as our actions and perspectives are culturally defined, meaning culturally constructed, so is our moral behavior. Meaning our moral behavior definitely is defined by what is right and wrong as prescribed in our culture. And since culture is the totality of learned, socially transmitted customs, knowledge, material objects, at lahat ng ito, it is only proper, tama lamang, that we try to comprehend and appreciate the impact of our culture in our overall understanding of people, of who they are, and even why they do what they do. Doon sa mga decision making processes na ginagawa natin sa atin pong mga kultura. Okay, now, in the Philippines, one way at looking at the problem of morality is actually to reflect on the prevailing norms of right and wrong among Filipinos. Si Grospe po, isang paring guro. Okay, siya po ay naglista ng ilang mga Filipino moral norms na pwede po nating pagbasihan ng ating mga iniisip na mga tama at mali sa ating lipunan. Okay? Ang una po dito, we have group-centeredness or groupthink. Okay? So this is the first Filipino moral norm according to Gorospe. Group-centeredness or groupthink. Anong ibig sabihin nito? Now, according to Gorospe, group-centeredness is all about what usually determines Filipino moral behavior, okay, is what we call as the conscience from the outside. Okay? Meaning, bago ka magdesisyon, iisipin mo muna kaagad, ano ba ang iisipin ng mga tao sa paligid ko? Okay? So that is actually part of what we think is right or wrong. Okay? Whenever we make decisions, kahit na sabihin natin hindi ito yung tingin kong tama, even if you say that this is what you think is right as a decision that you are making, you have already considered other people. Otherwise, you will not be coming up with that decision. You always think of the conscience from the outside, the people around you, perhaps your family, perhaps your friends. Okay, so this is one of those Filipino moral norms, and we consider this as the conscience from the outside. The second Filipino moral norm here that you see on screen is what we call as the don't be caught attitude based on shame or fear of the authority figure. Ano pong ibig sabihin nito? Okay, tingnan natin. Halimbawa, meron tayong national smoking ban dito sa Pilipinas. However, there are still a lot of Filipinos who are smoking in public places. Okay, sila nila, sige lang magyosi ka lang ng magyosi, basta siguraduhin mong hindi ka mahuhuli. Diba sa may school meron tayong mga lugar doon kung saan nilagay kung saan ka pwedeng magyosi sa B-side tsaka dun sa may tapat ng 7-Eleven, namimiss na natin yung lugar na yun okay. Kaya lang po ang nagiging problema natin minsan kapag napapadaan po daw ako doon, ang dami pa ring mga upos ng sigarilyo, kahit man lang sana yung upos ng sigarilyo, di ba, maitapon man lang ng maayos. Tabi-tabi po baka meron ho akong mga dito na mga gumagawa noon. Pero hindi naman kayo. Alam kong hindi kayo yun. Okay? So when we talk about the don't be caught attitude, ano pa? Halimbawa, sa cheating, okay lang para sa ibang mga estudyante mag-cheat. Basta, wag ka lang mahuhuli. Okay? Kayo ba, meron ng pagkakataon na nahuli kayo ng pag-cheat ng mga teachers ninyo? Okay? So that's one Filipino moral norm, that don't be caught attitude based on shame or fear or the authority figure. The third one is what we call as complacency, when one is aware but definitely is not concerned. Now, it is an open secret, alam natin yan, okay, that corruption is very much rampant in the Philippines. And even though we are aware of it, marami pa rin mga Filipino who do not really mind about changing the status quo, okay, by invoking their rights of suffering, but are just so indifferent about it. Ang sabi nga natin, when you talk about the opposite of love, it is not hate, it is indifferent. Okay, what we're trying to point out is these people. We know that corruption is very much rampant in our government. But why is it that halimbawa kayong mga kabataan ngayon, alam ninyo na kailangang magbago, pero pag panahon na ng pag-register for the election, hindi kayo pa-register. So what's going to change? Walang magbabago. 'Di ba? Iti-Twitter lang natin lahat ng ating mga disgusto sa gobyerno natin, pero wala naman tayong ginagawa. Okay, para baguhin ito. Sino sa inyo rito ang mga registered na? Okay, nagparehistro na para sa susunod na presidential election sa 22. Okay, ayan, medyo marami na rin sa atin kahit papaano nakapag-register. Okay, pero sana para sa 2022 election, siguro naman mga 18 years old na kayo bago mag-2022 ng Mayo. Okay, sana naman makaka-register lang bago mag-quarantine. Okay, I definitely extend naman yan ng comment. So, instead of just bursting out our disgust, okay, our frustrations on the current system of the government, why don't we go out and actually exercise our right of suffrage, since this is what is constitutionally due us. Okay, ito yung binigay sa atin na karapatan ng ating saligang batas. Natutuwa ako minsan na ang mga kabataan ay nagsasabi nilang mga disgusto sa gobyerno, pero pag nalalaman ko na ang mga ito ay hindi registered, tapos pwede na naman sila dapat na registered at their age, nalulungkot ako. Kasi honestly, people, nothing is going to change, not unless we try to act on it. Okay, so we just become complacent. Okay, we just become indifferent in a way. Okay, sa mga nangyayari sa lipunan po natin. And lastly, we talk about what? Rationalization as the final Filipino moral norm. Okay, now when we talk about rationalization, we have that instinct of justifying an act. We try to justify an act no matter how wrong it is. Say, for example, students like you guys know for a fact that cheating is bad. Plagiarism is bad, right? However, sometimes when students feel like it is the only way to pass a course, they will rationalize the act and continue doing it hanggang sa ma-achieve nila yung kanilang goal ng pagpasa. Okay? How many times have we justified our actions? Diba? Parang sila naman nagkokopyahan din. So ako din makikipagkopyahan. This is not to say that I never cheated back when I was studying. Okay? Naaalala ko, pagdating ng high school, ayun, may high school may pang kopyahan kasi ang hina ko talaga sa math. Okay? Ewan ko, psychological ba ito? Kasi pag nakakakita ako ng computations and whatnot, nag-install agad ako. Kayo magaling kayo eh, 'di ba? Ako hindi ako ganoon. Okay. So nung high school ako, ang nangyayari, ako yung tatanungin sa English 3. Tapos pag sa math naman, iba naman. So may usapan namin sa mga magkakaklase. But going to college, I think that is the turning point na I cannot do it anymore. Parang hindi ko na kaya. Okay, and even yung sa may master's degree, I mean, I can honestly say I never cheated. Okay, noong ako nag-aaral sa may master's degree, nung simula po akong nag-aaral noon. And sometimes we do rationalize and sometimes saan gumagana yung konsensya? Hindi na. And that's the reason why we say that our conscience cannot be trusted, because we can teach our conscience. In fact, we can numb our conscience. 'Di ba? Nananam natin yung conscience natin eh. Okay, kung baga natuturuan natin ang konsensya natin. Halimbawa, pag gumawa ka ng mali, kinakabahan ka pa sa umpisa. Pero kapag paulit-ulit na ginagawa na natin to, hindi na tayo kinakabahan. Bakit? Naturuan na natin ang konsensya natin na okay lang ang lahat. Right? So sometimes we try to rationalize things over just to justify an act, no matter how wrong the act can be. May question po ba tayo? Any questions so far? Ayan, sagot-sagot naman po tayo dyan. Okay, so ayun po. So these are the Filipino moral norms na tinatawag po natin. Jason Locinario, are you there? Is your microphone working, Jason? Hi, Jason. Nag-work ang microphone natin, Jason? Jason, use your microphone. Salita ka nga. Ay, hindi nagana ang kanyang microphone. Okay. Mark Nicolas, are you there? Mark Josel Nicolas, is your microphone working? Mark? Hello? Hindi gumagana ang microphone. Villares, hindi kompleto ang name mo, pero Villares, sino ka man, magsalita ka. Villares, is your microphone working? Wala, hindi ko pinapansin. Okay, wala daw siyang mic. Daryl, may microphone ka, tama? Hindi gumagana rin yata microphone. Anybody who wants to read again itong mga Filipino moral norms po natin dito? Anyone who wants to read? Paki-press lang po. Ayan, Aldrich, go ahead please kindly read again these 4 Filipino moral norms.
Group-centeredness or groupthink, the don't be caught attitude based on shame or fear of the authority figure, complacency when no one is aware but is not concerned, when one is aware but is not concerned, and rationalization.
Okay, thank you very much. Maraming salamat po. Now, let's go to this concept which again, katulad ng pinag-usapan natin dito, is very complicated. Okay, napakahirap unawain. Now, one way of knowing which ethical views work in certain contexts is by understanding the cultural differences of people. Okay, understanding the cultures of different people. Although there are certain universals that everyone might agree upon, it has to be accepted that somehow the manifestations of these certain universals vary from culture to culture. Say, for example, you talk about the concept, the idea of respect, okay? Cultural universal, you talk about the idea of love. That's a cultural universal. But however, you have to understand that the manifestation of these cultural universals vary from culture to culture. Behaviors of people are very much affected by the society, the culture that they belong to. It is in their society that they learn what is right and wrong, ano yung tama, mali, ano yung katanggap-tanggap o hindi. Now, communal groups, yung mga lipunan po natin, it has its ways in which we show respect for people, for the environment, and cultural traditions have become the go-to element if we want to understand why people vary in their perspective and in their actions. Kung gusto nating malaman kung bakit iba-iba tayo ng paniniwala, kung bakit iba-iba tayo ng mga gustong mangyari sa buhay natin, we always have to look at the cultural traditions of people. In this regard, we have to recognize, okay, and appreciate the differences in moral behaviors of people from varying culture. So isang bagay po yon na kailangan nating maintindihan. O yan, so makikita niyo po sa my next slide natin. Okay, the concept of cultural relativism. So this means viewing people's behavior from the perspective of their culture. Okay, it places a priority on understanding other cultures rather than dismissing them as strange or as exotic. They are different. Okay, but definitely that's normal in their culture. So on your screen here, makikita nyo po larawan nung ako'y nag-aaral pa sa may South Korea. This is our dormitory. Ito po yung rooms namin dito po sa may part na ito. Ito po ako, nakakadiri, di ba? Yan po ang aking itsura noong ako'y mga panahong K-popper pa. Okay. So, ito po yung aming dormitory. Sa may dorm po namin, dalawahan lang po sa isang room. Okay. So, andito po yung aking mga roommates. This is my roommate, si Narbu Sherpa. He's actually from Nepal. And also this guy, he was my roommate for 1 year. Si Dmitry Bogomolov. He's a Ukrainian. Okay, so dito po sa lugar na ito, somehow medyo kumbaga dito ako nagising sa katotohanan about cultural relativism. Okay, that I have to understand and I have to check and see kung ano ba yung tama at mali, and not to rub on the faces of my classmates, of my friends, of what I know is right on the basis of my culture. Kasi iba-iba kami iba-iba kami ng kultura ng pinanggagalingan. Dito po sa may right ninyo, makikita nyo naman po rito. I love this picture very much because these are some of my closest friends when I was in Korea. So you see here, this is a very good brother of mine. This is Gerald Halim. He's Indonesian. And this is Karen Levchuk. Okay, she's an Australian. And this is Natasha Schultz, si Tash. She is a South African. And this is Natalia Khan. By descent, she is Korean, but she's Kazakhstani. And in Kazakhstan, they speak Russian. At itong tao naman po ito ay isang, okay, siya po ay isang K-popper. Ako po yan, Kadiri, di ba? So, makikita nyo rito that somehow I was able to enculturize myself in a very, in a culture that has a lot of perhaps varying perspectives. Iba-iba kami ng tama at mali doon sa may perspekto ng kung ano yung tama at mali sa kultura namin. But then again, that's the only time that I find that I realize that I don't have to look at these people as strange, nor do I have to consider them as exotic, because again, they are different, but they are normal people, just like me. Because there are a lot of things that they do not understand about us Filipinos. Maraming mga bagay na hindi sila naiintindihan sa kung paano tayo magsalita, paano tayo makipag-usap, paano tayo mamuhay. Okay? Kapag po sila ay nakakaamoy na halimbawa ng alamang or ng tuyo sa doon, biglang maglalabasan yan. Okay? Sa kanilang mga rooms at magsisigaw, what is going on? What is that smell? Diba? So ikaw naman biglang Pilipino, hi, that's my food. And I love it. Diba? So ipapaliwanag mo, but then again, it's okay. Okay, we try to understand each other because sometimes, say for example, the first time na nakatikim ako ng Indian curry, okay, it was, yung una, yung amoy, yung medyo hindi ko matik, but noong medyo nagtagal-tagal na, nagustuhan ko na yung Indian curry. Iba yun sa curry na kinakain natin ngayon kasi they have different, may mga spices silang nilalagay na kakaiba. Okay? And yes, it's very good. Okay, napakasarap niya. And doon sa may dormitory na yon, since ang mga nakatira lang doon sa mga dormitory ay mga katulad namin na mga hindi taga-Korea or perhaps yung ibang mga Koreans na medyo galing sa mga malalayong lugar. Kaya iba-iba kami ng itsura dito. And I mean, I stayed there for 4 years. So, definitely, imposibleng wala akong maging stress. Imposibleng wala akong hindi maging stressful yung ibang pagkakataon. And believe me, the culture is very different. And I was staying in a place where the concept of right and wrong is very much dependent on a very cultural perspective kung saan ka nang galing. So, hindi mo talaga pwede siyang ilaban na ang tama ay yung tama layo. Right? I think you remember me saying na noong first and last face-to-face nating pag-aaral sa klase, nung course introduction ako sa inyo, I think you remember me saying that yung isa sa pinaka naging learning ko, okay, noong ako ay tumira sa ibang bansa, was to be more understanding of people. Right? Naalala niyo ba yon? 'Di ba? And I said that because I realized na even though you think you are right, it doesn't necessarily follow that you are the only person who is right in that room. Okay? Kasi minsan tayo, we have this tendency na pakiramdam natin, we know everything, alam natin kung paano ginagawa ang tama, ang tama ay ito lang, ang mali ay ito. At kapag nakakita ka ng ibang tao na magkaiba ng paniniwala sa'yo, anong ginagawa natin? We judge people based on our differences. But that's one thing that I realize na sobrang mali. Okay? Because somehow, being a foreigner in a country which is very different from us, I somehow I received grace from people. Kumbaga, people were very gracious of me whenever they see me being different because I am different. Okay? And it's not easy for you to just change your perspective in 1, 2, 3, or 4 years, because for the longest time, you have your own mindset as a Filipino, and you have to understand, people, that when I went to Korea, that was the first time that I left the Philippines. Tapos nilagay ka sa isang kulturang sandali lang, nalilito ako, naguguluhan ako. Parang gusto mo munang sandali nga, stop muna natin lahat. Parang gusto ko munang anong tawag dito, ko munang i-assess ano ba ang nangyayari sa kasalukuyan. But then again, you have to survive. Okay? And that's one of the learnings, definitely. Okay, na I could tell you. Okay, sobrang laki ng na naibago, okay, nabago sa akin. Yung when you talk about the concept of right and wrong, you have to understand, people, and I hope you understand. And if there's one thing that I want you to take away, at least as a learning from this class, is that, okay, even though you think you are right, that does not necessarily follow that you are the only person correct, or you are the only right person in that room. Maliwanag? Amen, amen, amen. Okay. Okay? Sana maliwanag po sa atin yon. Okay? So, we have to consider also the people around us. Okay? Now, let's continue, people, as we move along with our discussion on cultural relativism. Now, cultural relativism, okay, is the view that moral beliefs and practices vary with and depend on the human needs and social conditions of particular cultures. Okay, now if you're going to look at this picture on your screen, makikita nyo dalawang babae. Di ba? So, definitely, if you're just going to look at their picture here, you will see varying perspectives agad. Doon pa lang sa kasuotan nila. Yung isa, balot na balot. Yung isa, halos walang saplot. Tama po. And then, makikita nyo rito yung, may nagtataas ng kamay. May gusto kang itanong, sir. Go ahead. Any question? If you have your question, mag-raise the hand lang po kayo. May tanong po tayo? Wala naman, wala naman. Okay. So makikita natin dito, itong babaeng halos wala ng saplot, habang tinitingnan niya yung babae na tawag dito, balot na balot, ang iniisip niya, tingnan niyo rito. Okay? Nakalagay dito, everything covered but her eyes. What a cruel, male-dominated culture. Okay? And then, ito namang babaeng balot na balot, kapag tinitingnan niya itong babaeng halos walang saplot, ang naiisip niya, nothing covered but her eyes. What a cruel, male-dominated culture. So, kung makikita nyo rito, ano yung pareho nilang sinasabi? They both are discussing the concept of what a cruel, male-dominated culture is. Right? Pero, yung perspective nila ng cruel male-dominated culture ay magkaiba. Doon sa babaeng halos walang saplot, para sa kanya, ang isang cruel male-dominated culture ay kapag ang babae ay halos ayaw mo nang makita yung kanyang katawan. Right? Pero ang perspective naman ng isang babaeng balot na balot sa isang cruel male-dominated culture is when they allow women in their society na ganito na lamang ang itsura. Okay? So again, it's very much relative on their culture kung ano yung kanilang perspective ng tama at mali. Now, you have to understand that the definition of cultural relativism is entirely based on the premise that there can be no universal oughts. Walang pwedeng magdikta kung ano ang tama at sino ang tama at mali, because there is no culture that can be the basis of all that is good and true. Walang kahit na sinong kultura ang magdidikta kung ano ang tama at katanggap-tanggap. It is important to recognize yung cultural differences natin, since you have to understand that ethical judgments are relative to cultural context. Okay? Kung ano ang tama at mali ay dapat tinitingnan natin kung ano yung tama at mali sa konteksto ng kanilang kultura. Now, if we're going to bring in the concept of morality here, we have to understand that our morality can only be understood based on what? On what is culturally acceptable or not. Kung saan bahagi sila ng kanilang kultura. Then, we have to understand that cultural relativism should be understood as what? When we say cultural relativism, it is a celebration and appreciation of cultural diversity. Okay, so when we talk about cultural relativism, that is when we try to appreciate cultures. When we talk about cultural relativism, it's a matter of celebration of cultures. Okay? Kung meron kang nakikitang ibang kultura at iba ang paraan ng buhay nila sa'yo, celebrate it. Okay? Wala tayong magagawa doon. Yun ang pagtingin nila ng tama at mali. Okay? Now, this diversity could be manifested in the way we dress, the way we talk to the elderly kapag kausap natin ay matatanda, and even in our beliefs in the supernatural. Okay? It is important to underscore, it is important for us to understand, okay, the important historical role of cultural relativism sa pag-encourage natin ng cross-cultural understanding para makapag-contribute ito sa expansion ng humanism natin. We are all free, okay, to somehow express ourselves depending on what we think is what is right and what is wrong. Okay, and that is what cultural relativism is all about. It's all about the celebration and appreciation of cultures. Any questions so far? May questions ba tayo? Baka may tanong. Wala naman. Wala po tayong tanong. Okay, tuloy-tuloy po tayo. Case in point, people. Okay, so you see here on screen yung picture po ng cheek piercing in Thailand. Okay? Ito po ay ginagawa nila sa may Phuket, sa may Thailand. And they do this as a parang harvest celebration nila sa may Thailand. And they actually perform this para itaboy yung mga bad spirits and also for a good harvest. Okay. Kaya lang po, medyo kapag iisipin natin, pag titingnan natin ito, kung nasa may face-to-face class tayo rito, actually, I will be showing you a video clip, okay, na kung papaano nila ginagawa ito at kung papaano nila ginagawa yan. Ang dami doon. Medyo, ano nga lang, okay, napaka visual. Okay, kaya lang hindi natin mailagay dito kahit papaano. But anyway, just looking at this picture, people, this is very much cultural. Okay, but then again, when do we say that the practice is still in the perspective of what is right and wrong in the context of cultural relativism? Okay? Kailan ba natin sasabihin ng isang action ay tama pa o kung ang isang action ay mali na? Okay. Now, in effect, we say that cultural relativism, okay, results to, if not implies, moral relativism. Kasi nga, if we say that cultural relativism is a celebration and appreciation of different cultures, okay, inclusive of their values, of their perspective, of their worldviews, then definitely this would result to moral relativism. When we say moral relativism, this maintains that different societies and of course ages hold distinct systems of morality. Okay, meaning magkakaiba ng sistema ng tama at mali. And when you talk about moral relativism, it means that there are no objective and transcultural criteria for judging between these systems. Ibig sabihin, people are supposed to be understood from the perspective of their traditions. Okay, meaning no one has the right to intrude a society whose values are embedded in their culture and tradition. Okay, it's also wrong, perhaps improper, to teach these people what to do and what not to do on the basis of one's belief as an outsider. Say, for example, I went to Korea as an outsider. I was an alien for 4 years. And if I will tell them that some of their actions are unacceptable for Filipinos, do you think they would believe me? Baka pagtawanan nila ako. Sabi nila, hey, you're not in the Philippines. You are in Korea. That's why there are a lot of times Koreans, when I go out of the school premises, a lot of Koreans would tell me, you have to learn how to speak Korean. You are not in the Philippines. Not everyone speaks English here. Even in the center, even in Seoul, not a lot of Koreans are actually speaking English. So you have to survive. Right? So you have to take into consideration yung kanilang pagtingin sa kung ano ang tama at mali. Now, as diversity is celebrated in cultural relativism, we have to give due respect, okay, to people of all cultures. We don't judge them. We defer our judgments and we try to extend understanding para sa lahat. Okay? of course, when you talk about cultural relativism, ang isa sa pinakamagandang naidulot ng cultural relativism is it actually debunked the concept of ethnocentrism. Okay? Anybody who wants to read the definition of ethnocentrism on screen, please, pakibasa naman po. Raise your hand. Anyone? Baka ako may gustong magbasa ng definition dito para iba naman ang nagsasalita. Please. Anyone? Baka may gustong magbasa dito. Benigno. Janairo. You there? Sige, si Daryl nagtaas ng kamay. Sige, Daryl, pakibasa naman yung meaning ng ethnocentrism here.
Ethnocentrism is the practice of taking one's own people, society, and culture to be the vantage point from which all else is viewed and judged. Bruce and yearly 2006.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, when we talk about the concept of ethnocentrism, ang pinag-uusapan natin dito is that people who are ethnocentric believe that their culture is superior. Okay? At kapag nakakita sila ng ibang tao na tingin nila mali, ang kanilang ginagawa ay hinuhusgahan nila yung kulturang yon on the idea that their culture is right and the other cultures are wrong. Maliwanag po? So it is the practice of actually what? Taking your culture as the vantage point, as the tawag dito, as the judge of all other cultures in the world. Okay. Now, when you talk about the concept of ethnocentrism, it's actually an exact opposition to cultural relativism. Okay. Say, for example, people coming from first world countries could be prone to ethnocentrism dahil they have the idea that they are living in ideal, powerful countries. There perhaps can be a tendency that they might look down on other countries which are totally opposite to theirs. Okay? So, when you talk about ethnocentric individuals, they are prone to misreading context. So, pag tiningnan nila ang isang tao, hinuhusgahan kaad nila yung mga taong yon on the basis of their culture and not on the basis of the culture that is different from them. So when the behavior of other people is understood on the basis of a prescribed culture, okay? So anong iisipin natin sa iba? Titingnan natin sila na odd, perhaps we consider them as creepy, otherworldly, perhaps we might judge them to be utterly wrong, if not acceptable. So for example, tayong mga Pilipino, kumakain tayo ng balot. Tama po? But there are other cultures who think that it is wrong to eat balot. Right. Now, if they think that it is wrong to eat balot, they have already judged us. You understand? Because in our culture, it is not wrong to eat balot. In fact, for some, it's actually healthy. You understand? They might think it's gross, but hopefully they are not judging us for what we do. Okay? Maliwanag po tayo doon. Now, ethnocentrism leads to this prejudgment of people. Okay? Maliwanag po tayo doon. So somehow, ito yung isang advantage ng cultural relativism. Okay? Kung baga, tinatanggal niya yung maling paniniwala na ang isang kultura ay dapat hinuhusgahan niya ang ibang kultura. Okay? Na ang basis niya ay ang kulturang kanyang kinabibilangan. Okay, and of course, you have the concept also of Xenocentrism. Okay, pakibasa naman. Benigno, hello. Yan, pakibasa naman po yung ibig sabihin dito ng Xenocentrism. Kindly, please.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please, kindly read the definition of Xenocentrism. Hi.
Belief that in comparison to those of cultures.
Benigno, medyo choppy yung ano mo. Lapit ka sa microphone.
Ulitin ko lang, sir.
Sige, go ahead.
Xenocentrism is the belief that one's own cultural features are a downgrade in comparison to those of other cultures. Xenocentric individuals value commodities, style, culture, or even ideas from another country or culture other than their own.
Okay, thank you very much, Benigno. Okay, now tingnan ho natin maigi yung konsepto ng Xenocentrism. Kanina ang pinag-usapan natin ay ethnocentrism. 'Di ba? At ang pinaka-pro na maging ethnocentric ay yung mga tao from first world countries in the Americas and Europe, right? But those who are very much prone to becoming xenocentrics ay sino? Tayo po, mga nakatira sa mga developing countries. Okay? Sa mga dati ang tawag sa atin ay mga mga third world people. Okay. Now, when we talk about xenocentrism, this is actually the belief that what is foreign is best in terms of one's lifestyle, products, or ideas. Diba? When we talk about movies that we watch, when we talk about, say for example, the artists, the musicians that we listen to, okay, so makikita natin dito yung pag-patronize natin. And sometimes, we can't help it. I mean, it's very difficult to blame ourselves, particularly you guys, because you grew up in a system like this, di ba? Na we very much prioritize, okay, kung what is actually foreign, okay, to our culture, and that is what xenocentrism is, okay? Now, ang question natin dito is this: why are Filipinos more xenocentric than ethnocentric? Okay? Bakit mas considered na xenocentric ang mga Pilipino at ethnocentric? At ano nga yung difference ng ethnocentric at xenocentric? Anybody? Na-define na natin yung xenocentrism at ethnocentrism. Ano nga yung pagkakaiba ng xenocentric at ethnocentric? Anyone? Okay, sige, Benigno, go ahead.
Xenocentric po, sir, is the downgrade of one's own culture, sir. Parang mas maganda po yung ibang culture ng ibang bansa. Ang
Yun ang pakiramdam
ethnocentric
ng
naman,
tao.
sir.
Mm-hmm.
Opo, sir. Yung
Go ahead.
ethnocentric naman, sir, is that yung culture po nila is best than the other culture, sir.
Yeah, okay. So ayun po yung kaibahan ng xenocentrics at ethnocentrics. Now, ang question natin ngayon is this: why is it? Why do you think Filipinos are more xenocentric than ethnocentric? Why is it that we give so much regard to what is foreign instead of having that instead na dapat mas mataas yung pagtingin natin sa ating kultura? Bakit kaya mas xenocentric tayo kaysa ethnocentric? John Gabriel Escalona, nandyan ka, sir? John Gabriel, are you there? Romulo, De Honor, Ena, magana ang microphone natin, Ena. Ayan, wala nang nagsasalita sa akin. Okay. Why do you think Filipinos are more xenocentric? Sino nagtaas ng kamay? Sorry. Okay, pakiclick nga po ulit yung raise your hand. Yes, Mark. Go ahead. Bakit kaya mas xenocentric at hindi ethnocentric ang mga Pilipino? Go ahead, please.
Sir, kasi sa tingin ko po, we idol them, sir. Likes to idolize other people.
Ano po iyon? Ulit po. Ano po yan, Mark? Go ahead again, please. Ulit. Hi, Mark. Ayun, ang sagot niya is, we idolize other culture. Bakit nga kasi natin masyadong ina-idolize ng ibang culture? Sabi ni Mark Josel Nicolas, sabi niya, sir, kasi parang tingin nila mas high quality ang galing sa ibang bansa. Well, if we're going to look at it in perspective, pwede nating sabihin to a certain extent, yes. 'Di ba? Sabi naman ni J.R. Dumael, sabi niya, sir, baka on reason is part po ng history natin. Okay? Because we have been colonized. Yung konsepto ng colonialism. Thank you very much. And with that, papasok tayo dito sa may konteksto natin dito. Very much yung tama yung sinabi ni JR dito. Now, we have to understand that the history of the Philippines is actually affected, okay? Or the history of the Philippines affected the way Filipinos view themselves as part of the bigger world. Okay? Since historically, we have become slaves of first world countries. Ano nga yung mga bansang yon? You have Spain, you have America, you have Japan. Okay, since we have become slaves of first world countries, generally, our mindset seem not to go further away from it. We think of ourselves as slaves to the perspective of all that is of America and of Europe. Right? Yun yung nagiging problema natin actually sa ating mga Pilipino, right? You have to consider, say for example, yung names, di ba? We have very Western names. So, noong panahon ng mga lolo't lola natin, ang mga pangalan nila napaka-pure Spanish. Halimbawa, yung lola ko, ang pangalan niya ay Felicitas de Vera. Di ba? That's very Spanish. But sa inyo ngayon, ang pangalan nyo is very American yung first name, right? And then you have a very Spanish last name. Okay? So, ibang-iba rito yung pagtingin natin sa pangalan. Say for example, you talk about yung mga pangalan dito ng mga kaklase natin. Okay, ito halimbawa, pangalan ni Benigno Janeiro Artaruc, 'di ba? Napaka ano pa rin yan, napaka Spanish. Okay, but come to think of it, even in our names, 'di ba? We have very American names and then you have a Spanish surname. And then when you look in the mirror, you don't look like American nor do you look like Spanish. Right? So parang sometimes our identity ay ang hirap ihiwalay pa rin doon sa kung sino at ano tayo before, kung ano yung naging kasaysayan natin. Now, our history as Filipinos is a very seamless case of Xenocentrism. This is actually a byproduct of historical slavery. Okay, which is evidence in the way that we Filipinos value foreign commodities, kung bakit ito yung mga binibili natin. Di ba minsan pag lumalabas ka ng bahay, pag pupunta ka ng school, sometimes halos lahat ng mga suot mo, kamukha mo yung relo, sapatos, damit, pantalon, lahat-lahat, di ba? Most of these are foreign products. Okay? And because of our historical influences, we imitate their norms. Okay? Even if they do not seem fit. 'Di ba? Minsan lahat ginagaya natin kahit na magmukha tayong katawa-tawa. 'Di ba? We try to imitate whatever is given to us. We try to do whatever they do in their context. Nonetheless, we have to understand that cultural relativism actually gives us the idea, okay, ng mali ang konsepto ng ethnocentrism at xenocentrism, because again, when you talk about the concept of cultural relativism, it's all about what? The celebration, right, of what? Different cultures. Okay, so yun ang importanteng maintindihan natin. And also, we talk about the concept of xenophobia. Okay? Ano po bang ibig sabihin ng xenophobia? Now, when we talk about xenophobia, it is the dislike or prejudice against people from other countries. Right? And perhaps, sa mga panahon na ito yung nararanasan ng mga Chinese people sa buong mundo. Right? Yung tinatawag nating xenophobia. It could be change also to SINO, sino, mga Chinese, xenophobia. Minsan natatakot tayo pag may mga Chinese sa paligid natin dahil hindi lamang meron tayong problema sa kanila, politically speaking, in terms of our territory right now, sa mga jurisdiction natin, but also of the current health problem sa buong mundo. I remember last term, nagsab ako sa isang professor and we were discussing about yung territorial problem ng Pilipinas at ng China. And then one of the students actually said, sabi niya, how he wished na sana maglaho na lang na parang bula o mamatay na lang yung lahat ng mga Chinese. And I stopped him there, okay? Because again, kahit na sabihin mong gumawa ng mali or pagpalagay nating mali yung nagawa ng ibang mga tao, you have to consider still, okay, the fact that these are human beings, these are people, okay, na tao rin sila. And I feel like you don't really wish ill of people despite of your differences, despite na magkakaiba tayo. Okay, so that's one thing that we have to consider still. So that is the concept of xenophobia. Now let's look at this idea right now and let's look at the difference between let's look at the strength and the weaknesses of cultural relativism. So pakibasa naman po yung mga strength ng cultural relativism. Anybody who wants to read the strength of cultural relativism here? Apat po ito, pakibasa na lamang po. Anyone? Raise your hand na lang po para medyo mapabilis tayo. Naku, magpo 4 o'clock na, hanggang 4 lang tayo. Pali-pali, pabilis na lang po. Okay, sino gusto? Aldrich. Okay, go ahead. Please, pakibasa po yung mga strengths ng cultural relativism.
Strengths. What is considered morally right and wrong should be judged. Sir.
Yeah, go
Nawala
ahead.
nawala yung PDF, sir.
Hang on. I'm sorry.
Nawala yung PDF, sir.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, balik tayo rito po. Pasensya na, medyo may napindot lang tayo rito. Hang on. Saan na ba tayo? Sorry po. Okay. Ayan. Okay, habang ibinabalik ko po ito, ang magiging schedule bali ng discussion natin will be this. Every Thursday, we will be having our online session. And then Saturday po, that is going to be our learning task day. And then pag Tuesday naman po, yun po yung ating magiging sa discussion board naman po tayo. I hope it's just okay with you guys. Okay lang ba yon? So kapag Tuesday, okay, pag Thursday, katulad ng ginagawa natin ngayon, dito, Blackboard collaborate tayo. Pag Saturday, it would be our learning task day. And then, pagdating naman ng Tuesday, that will be for our discussion board. Okay lang po ba sa atin yung ganong setup? Para hindi tayo palaging collaborate yung ginagawa natin. Okay lang po ba sa inyo? Sagot naman dyan. Okay, so once a week lang po yung magiging online collaborate natin, and also para po matulungan din natin yung ating mga kaklaseng hindi natin nakakasama dito sa ating online session, please remember that our Blackboard Collaborate class is being recorded. It is being recorded, okay, para po kung gusto nating balikan yung ating lectures online, and for our classmates, okay, para they would be able to keep up with our discussion also, kahit papano maaral po nila yung ating mga lectures naman. Okay, I'm sorry, Aldrich, please kindly read again. Thank you po.
Okay, sir. Strengths. What is considered morally right and wrong should be judged based on cultural context. Cultural relativism is an answer to cultural annihilation. Cultural relativism promotes multiculturalism.
Thank you very much. Aldrich, pakibasa na nga din yung weaknesses ng cultural relativism, please.
Ay, sir. Cultural relativism might fall prey to the idea that universal standards do not exist. If universal standards do not exist, so does morality. The cultural relativism gives birth to ethical relativism, which veers away from idea that there are objective moral standards.
Okay, so medyo malalim yung mga jargons na ginagamit natin dito, ano? But let me just explain to you this, okay? So, dun sa may strength ng cultural relativism, isa sa mga strength nito definitely is we are not judging people based on our cultural context, okay? So, we try to understand people on the basis of where they are coming from. Another strength of cultural relativism is that it is an answer to cultural annihilation, knowing that cultural relativism is actually what? An appreciation and a celebration of cultures. And lastly, when we speak of cultural relativism, this is actually promoting multiculturalism. Since again, this is a celebration of cultures. Walang mas mataas, walang mas mababang kultura, lahat tayo pantay-pantay. But then again, part of the weaknesses of cultural relativism are the following. Cultural relativism might fall prey to the idea na walang universal standard, okay, ng tama. And then, if there are no universal standards, so does morality. Ibig sabihin ba nito, kapag tayo ang lahat ay tinitingnan natin on the basis of the cultures of other people, so would this mean that morality should be also judged on the basis of other people? Meaning, kapag ganun ang ginawa natin, there would be no universal moral standards. And if there are no moral standards, it veers away from the idea na wala ngang objective moral truth. Dahil ang katotohanan ay nakadepende sa kultura ng tao. Okay, so these are some of the strengths and weaknesses of cultural relativism. Any questions so far? May mga tanong pa po ba tayo? Go ahead, please. May tanong po? Okay. We have to understand that cultural relativism, although advantageous at some points, okay, could actually be very much detrimental. It empowers cultural tolerance. We try to tolerate people while at the same time, it rejects moral absolutes. Okay, so these are the pros and cons, okay, of cultural relativism. Aldrich has a question here. Ang sabi niya, ang racism po ba, sir, ay type ng xenophobia? Again, when you talk xenophobia, it's actually the indifference of an individual to a certain tawag dito, isang bahagi ng mga tao, halimbawa mga Chinese. But you have to understand that when you talk about the race, okay, hindi naman porket halimbawa, I will give you a very good example of xenophobia. Say for example, yung ginawa ni Hitler sa mga Hudyo, that is actually considered as xenophobia, the Jewish race, right? He ordered the annihilation of the entire Jewish race. Okay? So that is considered as xenophobia and a racism, okay, to be exact as well. Okay, kasi halimbawa pag sinabi mong galit sa mga Pilipino, that could not be considered as racism. Kasi kung ang galit ay sa entire Malay race, okay, that can be considered as racism and xenophobia at the same time. 'Di ba? Kasi ang race natin galing tayo sa mga Malays. Tama, Aldrich? Gets natin? Okay, thank you very much. Do we still have other questions? May tanong pa po tayo? Okay, tuloy po tayo. Konting slide na lang po ito at matatapos na po tayo. Okay, we talk about the concept of multiculturalism. Okay, so dito po sa my screen natin, if we're going to look at the definition of multiculturalism, this is a characteristic of a society that has what? Many different ethnic or national cultures mingling freely. Ibig sabihin, may kalayaang mabuhay ng sama-sama, and it could also refer to what? Political or social policies which support or encourage peaceful coexistence of some sort. Now, important in the idea of multiculturalism is the idea of cultural practices. Okay, no matter how unusual, no matter how odd or strange people might find them to be, still we try to celebrate and appreciate cultures of people. Now, let's talk about cultural tolerance, people. Now, cultural relativism should actually result to cultural tolerance, okay? And when we talk about cultural tolerance, what we have to understand, people, is this, okay? Cultural relativism should result to cultural tolerance in order to preserve yung distinctiveness ng mga tao. The word is what? Tolerance. Okay, that is one thing that we have to make sure that we understand. Now, distinctiveness and diversity should be celebrated because, again, we people are all different in many ways. And with that being said, we also are very much the same in many ways. With this being said, people, the perpetuation or yung pagpapatuloy ng kultura can only be possible through tolerance. Okay. And how do we improve yung ating cultural tolerance? Paano po natin ito ginagawa? Okay, so we now proceed to the next slide. Okay, now, cultural sensitivity is actually the key to cultural tolerance. If we want to be tolerant of cultures of people, then we have to be culturally sensitive. Now, by cultural sensitivity, we mean it is being aware that cultural differences and similarities between people. Like what I said a while ago, we people are very much different in so many ways, but at the same time, we are very much similar in so many ways. Okay, and when we are aware of our cultural differences and similarities, we try to exist with these similarities and differences without assigning them a value. We don't say that people are wrong. We don't say that people are right. We don't say positive or negative, better or worse, right or wrong. Okay? Nonetheless, pag sinabi natin cultural sensitivity, it doesn't mean that we turn a blind eye to some cultural practices which are inhuman. Okay? Meaning, we do not use cultural relativism as an excuse to continue practices which violate human rights. Say for example, kanina pinag-aralan natin yung FGM or female genital mutilation. Ang FGM ba, when we talk about female genital mutilation, does it violate human rights of women? Ito ba ay nagbabiolate ng human rights ng mga kababaihan? Sagot? Uy, magsagot naman kayo. Okay. FGM, does it violate human rights of women? Oy, nawawala na kayo. Mag-chat box naman kayo rito. Ayan. Does it violate? Okay. Ayan, at least may mga sumasagot. Bakit nga bina-violate yung human rights ng mga kababaihan? Kasi nga, bata pa lang sila, no matter what their ideas of FGM is, even if they say that it is a rite of passage for a woman, or even if they say that it is actually for the preservation of their womanhood, the fact that they are actually mutilating the genitalia of the girls, okay, this is actually a violation of the right of the women, okay, para sa kanilang kabutihan. Okay? So, as multiculturalism celebrates differences, okay, we only tolerate yung mga acceptable practices, okay, which value, okay, which celebrates, okay, human life, but we do not tolerate, okay, any forms of endangering human life in general. We should never be in agreement to practices that devalue human life. Okay. However, there is always that need, a thorough observation and understanding of the culture of people. That's why we have to be very careful in our assessment whether a particular practice is a violation of an individual right or wrong. That's the reason why we highly encourage cultural tolerance. Okay, but that does not mean that we will be compromising human life, human rights in general. Okay, a particular culture cannot invoke cultural relativism at all times. Hindi po pwedeng sa lahat ng pagkakataon ang mga tao, they would actually invoke cultural relativism. Yes, they can say it's a celebration of culture. It's like an appreciation of cultures. But if it is actually endangering human life and human rights, then definitely we say no to this. Okay. Now, on your screen, you will see here the different tips for improving cultural sensitivity. Okay? 4 po itong tips na ito. Ano-ano po ba ito? Okay, tingnan nga po natin ano-ano yung nakalagay dito na mga tips for improving our cultural sensitivity. Angelo Tobiera, gising ka pa? Angela, pakibasa nga yung 4 tips for improving cultural sensitivity. Yung headings lang. Ay, hindi nagana ang mic. Okay, Danica, gumagana ang microphone natin. Danica? Wala, hindi gumagana yung microphone natin. Okay. Okay, hindi gumagana ang microphone niya. Okay, Ana Joy, Anyo Nuevo. Ana Joy, are you there? Gumagana yung microphone? Ana Joy? Kung hindi rin gumagana. Anybody who wants to read yung mga headings lang po. Okay. Tips for improving cultural sensitivity. We only have 5 minutes left for our class. Okay, we still have 2 more slides to go. Yes, Aldrich, go ahead.
Cultural sensitivity is the key to cultural tolerance. It is being
No, ito
aware.
lang yung tip, Aldrich, yung tips na lang. Yung
tips,
tips na lang, pakibasa na lang. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Becoming more sensitive to cultures, including your own, is an important skill everyone should learn. The good news is you can improve your cultural sensitivity without having to travel far from home. Here are some few tips to get you started.
Go ahead.
Number 1, exposure.
Exposure.
The truth of the matter is no matter where you live, you are exposed to other cultures. Look for local festivals and events. Focus on other cultures. Chinese New Year, El Dia de los Muertos, Holy Festival, just to name a few.
Go ahead. Another. After the exposure, kailangan i-expose natin yung sarili natin sa ibang kultura. Next one, Aldrich. Education.
Understanding the cultural practices of others can make or break an interaction. We show respect by observing those practices, so knowing what not to do is crucial. Learn from other cultures by reading some online magazines, journals, or blogs.
Next one.
Curiosity. Being culturally curious doesn't mean you have to sell everything and become a backpacker. You can start small by going to a local restaurant to try new food. Ask questions. Is this house dish traditionally served in your country?
And lastly,
Self-awareness. Knowing that no,
self-awareness.
knowing more about your own culture is the most important part of developing cultural sensitivity. You can expect to truly understand someone else's until you know yourself. Start by answering a simple question: what makes you and your culture unique?
Okay, so ito po yung ating mga tips dito for improving cultural sensitivity. We expose ourselves to different cultures. We educate ourselves. That's the reason why we're having this discussion at the moment. Also, by just being curious. Okay, and also lastly, by becoming self-aware. Okay, because the more that you are enriched with the different cultures of people, the more that you will realize and you will become more self-aware that you are somehow very much different from other people, from different cultures. And to sum up our discussion this afternoon, remember that although diversity of cultures is heavily encouraged, okay, this should be exclusive of customs and traditions which disrupt normal human functioning. That's the reason why it is crucial that we are always reminded that cultural relativism should not in any way be used as an excuse to continue cultural practices which categorically impede, if not violate, human rights. And that wraps up our discussion this afternoon on ethics and culture.